को हमारे साथ मनीष सिंह भी जुड़ रहे हैं। मनीष ऑफ कोर्स इमर्जिंग मार्केट इन्वेस्टर हैं, लेकिन ओवरऑल जियो पॉलिटिक्स को भी और ग्लोबल पॉलिटिक्स को भी ऑब्जर्व क्लोजली करते ही हैं। मनीष, गुड मॉर्निंग देयर इन लंदन। ये मामला तो किसी ने एक्सपेक्ट नहीं किया था, एकदम हाथ से निकलता हुआ नज़र आ रहा है। आपके पास लेटेस्ट क्या आ रहा है आप अपने सर्कल से कि आप कैसे कितना वर्सन हो सकता है यहाँ से?
Good morning, Ajay. I would say that it is not a big surprise in terms of his incursion into Ukraine, but it is very specific. He's targeting only the military bases in Ukraine. So the Russian attacks are limited to military bases. I think the civilian casualties or civilian areas are not under as big an attack. Now, it does not mean that the civilian areas will not be bombarded. We don't know yet. But the consequences for Russia is also going to be severe. The way I see this happening is that, well, Russia is going to neuter some of the military capability of Ukraine, and then probably it is going to stop, and then the talks are going to continue, and when it becomes very evident that Ukraine is not going to join NATO, then I think things can go back to as it were. Well, it will never be as it were, but it can calm down. That's my feeling and expectation at this time.
Right. Manish, markets, emerging markets, Indian markets, do you see them getting cheaper? हो सकता है यहाँ से और अच्छे वैल्यूएशंस आए। कितना ज़्यादा नीचे की तरफ आपको पॉसिबिलिटी प्रोबेबिलिटी नज़र आती है गिरते हुए?
So if you look at the market, I mean, and if you look at the global market first, the S&P index is already in correction territory, 10%, right, over 10%. Nasdaq is already down 15, 17%. In general, the markets are not in a very good way. And so there is a good thing to it. Like, it can't get hugely worse. It can get moderately worse again because of this element. But a lot of worsening thing has happened. But what you have to really think about, the Federal Reserve and U.S. inflation is the biggest factor. You know, people were talking about the rate rise in March should be 25 basis points or 50 basis points. Now, one may start thinking whether there will be a rate rise given what's happening in Ukraine. I think it's a bit inconceivable the Fed is going to raise rates if the situation in Ukraine worsens. If that was to happen, that is going to stabilize the market, no rate rise. And as for oil commodity, which I think is a big factor, I have no doubt that there will be some coordination and increase in supply from other U.S. Allies, I should say, in Middle East, and that should take care of some of these situations. I mean, we are not in the scenario that we were in 1970s, where U.S. was not energy dependent and Middle East was the only big supplier. So a lot of it has changed. There's plenty of supply, and it will be a matter of deals to be done for increased commodity supply to happen, and that should also come to the market. I do not expect things to get very worse. However, if oil was to go very high, then as you can imagine, Finance Minister Sitaraman must be very concerned, and anybody in emerging market who is oil energy importer will be concerned because the markets can extract a huge price for that. So I would, as I think we spoke a couple of days ago, and I said, I'm not looking to do more in emerging markets for these reasons, and I think those are happening now. So one has to be patient, and you will have more opportunities.
All right. Good afternoon, Manish. Priyanka here. Pleasure to have you on the show. Absolutely right. यही एक कंसर्न है, अगर यूएस सप्लाई राइज करता है, ईरान न्यूक्लियर डील होती है, तो क्रूड के प्राइस को चेक इन कर पाएंगे, क्योंकि इंडिया के लिए सबसे बड़ा कंसर्न ही फ्यूल इंपोर्ट का है। क्रूड कंजम्पशन सबसे ज़्यादा इफेक्टेड होगी मेजरली, और ट्रेड कमोडिटीज़ इतनी बड़ी वॉल्यूम में नहीं होती यूक्रेन से या रशिया से, लेकिन क्रूड इन्फ्लेशनरी प्रेशर क्रिएट करेगा। लेकिन इन सब की पॉसिबिलिटी और प्रोबेबिलिटी कितनी लग रही है, क्योंकि क्या बाजार अब इन्हें रीड करना चाहता है? Are markets really looking forward to these two major triggers?
So I would say that, even the oil is trading slightly higher on the back of this news, I do not expect it to really snowball into like 130 or 140 levels. I don't see that happening because that is a concern to U.S. as well. And if you parse through what President Biden said in his speech a couple of days ago, it was very clear that he said that he wants the impact of these sanctions and these events to be on the Russian economy, not on the US economy. So I think everyone is very concerned about energy prices, and you will see some coordinated action, and that should keep things in check.
मनीष, हाय, गुड आफ्टरनून। मानसी दिस साइड। बाजार ने स्थिति कई सारी देखी और कई सारी स्थिति को डाइजेस्ट भी कर लिया है, लाइक कोरोना, ओमिक्रॉन इज ऑल बिहाइंड अस, इकोनॉमी ओपनिंग अप, यहाँ पर थीम चल रही है। इतनी सारी चीज़ें जो आज नेगेटिव दिख रही है, सब में कुछ चीज़ें हैं जो कि बाजार काफ़ी हद तक डाइजेस्ट कर चुका है। एक बार आपका नज़रिया मैं जानना चाहूँगी, पिछले एक साल में काफ़ी सारे शॉक्स हमने देखे हैं, ये शॉक फिलहाल जो देखने को मिल रहा है, इससे जल्द ही उबरना, आई थिंक इट्स अ वेरी अफर्मेटिव स्टेटमेंट, एंड यहाँ पर उबरना भी काफ़ी ज़्यादा संभव हो पाएगा। इसके साथ ही क्या आपको लगता है कि जियोपॉलिटिकल रिस्क कंटिन्यू होते हैं थोड़ा ज़्यादा, और क्योंकि मच अवेटेड इवेंट है यूएस फेड की बैठक, क्या ब्याज दरों को लेकर कोई पोस्टपोन इन रेट हाइक्स एक्सपेक्टेड लग रहे हैं आपको?
Yes, I do think that Fed is going to take notice of that. There are two factors happening in the background. If you look at the U.S. disposable income, that has come down a lot. Now it is trending below the level that we have seen over the last 3 quarters. So that is going to put things in place for Fed that they do not have to increase rates a lot. So that's number one. And second is what is happening in Ukraine. So that should put the U.S. on the back foot as well. That should really increase rates when you're heading into a recession or high oil prices, which is going to hit the consumers extremely hard. And if oil price increases and consumers don't do very well, then automatically you have a very low GDP growth. So inflation is not a concern, and that is going to stop the Fed in its steps. So that's one factor. The larger context, if you look at all the conflicts that has happened over the last 30, 40, 50 years, there are two conflicts that stands out where market was largely or impacted in a big way. And that was one was the Iraq and Kuwait, when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And that was one big one. And there was another big one which I forget now. But the common thing between these two were that the U.S. forces were on the ground and U.S. was directly involved militarily. That is not going to happen. Ukraine is not part of NATO. U.S. is not treaty bound to send forces into Ukraine to defend. So they're going to just keep arming the rebels and supporting. And the barrier for U.S. forces to go on the ground in this conflict is extremely high, given what happened in Afghanistan and the chaotic withdrawal that they've had recently. I don't think American people will accept that, and I don't think Congress is going to pass such rules. And so if Mr. Putin makes a move into Poland or Eastern Europe, then of course U.S. is treaty bound to defend, and you will have, and U.S. forces are there in Eastern Europe along with British forces. But my feeling is this will stay limited to Ukraine, as I said before, and then there will be talks. All Russia wants is to keep that buffer zone, what it calls, between itself and the NATO alliance. It does not want NATO on its doorstep. So if that gets resolved, then this could disappear very quickly. So looking forward to the market, two things can happen. A massive de-escalation and inflation number starts coming down in the US. And that will be extremely bullish, but that could be 3 or 4 weeks away from now.
Manish, thank you so much for connecting with us and giving your analysis on all of these. The situation right now, many triggers coming up, और इसमें आपसे बातचीत करना हमारे लिए काफ़ी फ़ायदेमंद है। अजय, यहाँ पर काफ़ी